They called it just hard racing, but inside McLaren, the word everyone's whispering is trust. The first lap in Singapore wasn't supposed to change anything. Two cars, same team, one tight corner. Yet within hours, Andrea Stella had launched an internal investigation that cut to the heart of McLaren's rebirth. Not about pace, not about pit stops, about loyalty. Because when Oscar Piastri's calm radio line, "That wasn't very team-like," hit the airwaves, it didn't just describe contact, it described a fracture. If you love F1 without the noise, hit subscribe, and let's dive straight into it. McLaren's post-race timeline tells the story. Within 4 hours of the checkered flag, senior engineers were debriefed separately. By dawn in Woking, the phrase "operational impartiality" appeared in Stella's notes, code for a crisis of confidence between two title contenders. 22 points apart, 6 rounds to go, and Max Verstappen still lurking within mathematical reach. What began as a lap 1 brush is now a question that could decide the championship itself. Can McLaren still race as one team, or has Singapore exposed a rivalry they can no longer contain? From the grandstands, it looked harmless, carbon brushing carbon at turn 7, but the telemetry told a harsher truth. Oscar Piastri's steering correction registered a 2/10 loss in Sector 1. Norris's front wing picked up a microfracture that shifted aero balance by 1.8 points. Both cars stayed alive, but McLaren's systems lit up in red. That wasn't racing damage, that was evidence. Engineers replayed the start frame by frame. Piastri's launch was clean, his reaction time sharper by 0.22 seconds. Norris dived anyway, threading through a space narrower than the halo above his head. For a heartbeat, both Papaya cars shared the same piece of track and the same dream before the clash forced one of them to yield. When the radio crackled with Piastri's measured voice, Stella didn't hear frustration, he heard disbelief. In the garage, silence followed. No blame, no apology, just data pouring in. Temperature spikes, vibration warnings, tire deltas widening. Inside McLaren's control room in Woking, engineers began mapping risk scenarios, not for mechanical failure, but for the invisible one, erosion of cooperation. Because when drivers stop trusting that fairness governs every call, milliseconds become miles. Andrea Stella didn't flinch when the cameras turned to him after Singapore. No excuses, no PR polish, just one sentence that echoed through the paddock. "We need to be accurate because there's a lot at stake." In F1 language, that's not protocol, that's panic control. Within hours, McLaren confirmed what insiders already suspected. An internal investigation was underway. But this wasn't about apportioning blame, it was about redefining trust. Stella's engineers were instructed to submit full driver interaction reports. Every radio call, every delta adjustment, every instance where team orders had been interpreted differently. The phrase, "let them race," had been McLaren's quiet creed for 2 seasons, a promise that freedom would build fairness. But freedom, as Singapore proved, cuts both ways. Behind closed doors in Woking, the investigation's first question was brutal in its simplicity. Can equality survive a title fight? Because in a world where one driver's win means another's loss, the team's neutrality starts to look like neglect. Stella knew the numbers, but he also knew the psychology, and both pointed to the same conclusion. McLaren's harmony, once its greatest strength, was now its most fragile illusion. In isolation, Singapore was a skirmish. In the standings, it's a threat. Oscar Piastri still leads Norris Landis by 22 points. Thin ice when Verstappen trails by only 38. 6 races remain, and every call from the McLaren pit wall now has championship weight. That's why Stella's investigation isn't just about trust, it's about arithmetic. The data tells a brutal story. Across the last 3 rounds, Piastri has averaged 18.2 points per race, Norris 15.7, Verstappen 16.1. The margins are razor thin. 1 pit stop delay, 1 compromised undercut, and Red Bull's champion is back in range. McLaren has already wrapped up the constructors' title. That part is secure, but driver harmony? Hanging by a thread. For rivals, Singapore was blood in the water. Red Bull knows they don't need to outdevelop McLaren, they just need the orange cars to keep tripping over each other. And that's exactly what Stella's review must prevent, because if mistrust keeps spreading, Verstappen won't have to fight them. He'll just watch them implode. The next 2 weekends won't test the MCL 60's speed, they'll test McLaren's soul. Formula One feeds on weakness, and the moment McLaren's internal review became public, the rest of the grid smelled blood. In Singapore's paddock corridors, Mercedes engineers whispered that Woking had lost control of its own garage. Ferrari insiders told La Gazzetta that Stella's honesty, rare, almost naive, had opened the door to chaos. Even Red Bull's camp, normally discreet, was quietly thrilled. Verstappen's strategist was overheard calling McLaren's problem a championship gift. Perception matters as much as performance. When rivals sense instability, they push harder. On track, in negotiations, in the driver market. Piastri's camp has already received what one insider described as curious messages from Mercedes personnel ahead of the 2026 power unit era. Norris, meanwhile, still keeps open lines with Red Bull's senior management. McLaren's once unified future suddenly looks negotiable. Inside Woking, Stella knows that vulnerability can't stay hidden. Engineers follow trust, and sponsors follow results. If McLaren doesn't restore balance fast, the internal investigation meant to heal the team could end up accelerating its fracture, because in Formula One, loyalty lasts only as long as belief. And right now, belief is running on fumes. For Oscar Piastri, Singapore didn't end with a scrape of carbon, it ended with a shift in mindset. Since joining McLaren, the Australian had built his reputation on calm obedience and surgical precision. He lifted when told, sacrificed strategy when needed, and never let frustration leak through. But his radio line, that wasn't very team-like, broke that pattern. Psychologists in motorsport call it the fairness breach, the moment a driver stops feeling protected and starts protecting himself. For Norris Landis, the pressure runs in reverse. He's the face of McLaren's revival, the loyal cornerstone who carried the team through lean years. But inside the garage, the narrative has flipped. Now he's seen as the aggressor, the driver whose ambition threatens the team's harmony. He can't win without being accused of betrayal. He can't yield without being seen as weak. It's a psychological vice. Andrea Stella's investigation has to do more than analyze data. It has to rebuild belief. Because the danger isn't the crash itself, it's what lingers after. When two drivers start interpreting every silence, every tire call, every radio tone as bias, performance collapses long before the car does. And in a title fight this tight, doubt is the slowest puncture of all. For years, McLaren's internal code was simple: don't crash into your teammate. But simplicity collapses under championship pressure. Singapore proved that. Now, Stella's task is to rewrite the rulebook, not for aerodynamics, but for behavior. The let them race philosophy that once symbolized freedom must evolve into structure, because fairness without framework is chaos waiting to happen. Behind closed doors, McLaren engineers are mapping every scenario: tire offset, pit sequence, undercut priority. Each outcome now demands a predefined answer, no more gray zones. If Piastri leads with worn mediums and Norris is on fresher softs, the call must be known before the lights go out. Drivers may hate it, but predictability beats suspicion. Numbers back it up. Since July, McLaren has lost on average 3.5 points per race to intra-team hesitation, stacked pit stops, delayed calls, second-guessing strategy. Over 6 rounds, that's a 20-point swing, enough to flip the championship. Stella knows clarity is painful, but inconsistency is fatal. The investigation's next phase isn't about blame, it's about survival by precision, because in 2025, fairness must finally have rules. Time is McLaren's rarest resource. 6 races left, 22 points between teammates, 38 to Verstappen. The constructor's crown already secured, yet the driver's title still slipping through their fingers. Every weekend now becomes a referendum on trust. Every pit call, every sector split, every silence on the radio will decide whether McLaren crowns a champion or fractures beyond repair. The evidence is already there. Piastri's steering correction in Singapore cost over 11 seconds across race distance. Norris's delayed undercut in Suzuka bled 0.7 seconds to Verstappen. Tiny margins, fatal trends. Stella knows he's standing at the edge of history. A team with the fastest car, but a trust deficit deep enough to erase it all. Formula One remembers these moments. Hamilton versus Alonso in 2007. Vettel versus Webber in 2013. Rosberg versus Hamilton 2016. All won battles, all lost teams. McLaren now faces the same crossroad. Sacrifice equality for order or protect fairness until it destroys them. The investigation's clock is ticking, and if Papaya Orange waits even one race too long, the title won't be stolen, it'll be surrendered. If you want to see how this story ends, stay with us. Next, we dive into what McLaren's findings could mean for Piastri's future beyond 2025.